Hey future York students!
I'm Sidel.
And I'm Neetha.
And welcome to the Faculty of Liberal Arts and Professional Studies Program Chat Series.
We want you to know that here in LA&PS, you will study what you love and learn what you need.
In this chat, you'll be hearing from future professors as well as current students about the program.
What it has to offer you, like internship opportunities.
And what your first year in the program may look like.
Alright, should we get started?
Yeah, let's get started.
Enjoy, everybody.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Liberal Arts and Professional Studies chat. Today, we're going to be talking about one of our most interesting programs, which is our program in Equity Studies. Before we get started today, I do want to talk a little bit about the land that York University is on. This meeting is virtual, and because of that, we are not all actually gathered in the same space. York's land acknowledgement might not represent the territory that you are currently on, and I would ask that if that is the case, that you each take the responsibility to acknowledge the traditional territory that you are on and its current treaty holders. As a member of the York University community, I recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Takaranto has been taken care of by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, and the Métis. It is now home to many Indigenous peoples. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peacefully share and care for the Great Lakes region. Now what I'd like to do is introduce a very special guest who's going to be talking to us today about the Equity Studies program, Professor Brienza. Good morning, Professor Brienza.
Good morning. Welcome. Thanks
Thanks very much. So you're going to take us through a little bit about what Equity Studies is and what students can expect, I think. Is that?
Definitely, yes. So, yes, as Adam mentioned, I'm Professor Paul Brienza. I teach in the Department of Equity Studies, which is not something that people immediately know what we do off the bat. So I'll give you a bit of a brief description of what we do. We have actually, in the past, kind of or in the last number of years, reoriented ourselves to increasingly focus on human rights. So we're in the process, I believe, of focusing more on human rights and equity studies. And in terms of programs at York, which, York is a very innovative place in many, many ways. And I think our program reflects that innovation, primarily because we are an unusual program. There aren't many programs in the province of Ontario or indeed across Canada that focus on human rights. And that is definitely something that we do and are increasingly doing more of. So, there are many great programs at York from in the social sciences, from sociology to anthropology to political science to history and so on. But we have a unique program to the extent that we, as I said, focus on human rights. And as I said, the province of Ontario, I think there might be only one or two other programs that focus on human rights. And in addition to that, we are also in the process of getting ourselves a graduate program in human rights specifically. And that would make us one of two in Canada with a human rights focused graduate program. So there is a development going on in our program of increasing specialization on human rights. And as you know, or hopefully have a sense for, human rights is one of the big issues globally in this day and age. It is something that is impacting, for example, us very significantly, or for us, we might say, to think about in this context of the COVID pandemic, questions of rights to vaccines, rights of vaccine delivery, inequalities globally, when it comes to the delivery of vaccines and the treatment of COVID. This has revealed kind of the inequalities in the global environment. and introduce the idea, I think, a kind of different element to the question of human rights. So what we do in general at Equity Studies is, as I say, we're moving increasingly in the direction of human rights, and we have new faculty like Tom Hooper, who's here, and Yvonne, who unfortunately couldn't be here as well, new faculty that are coming in, as well as older faculty. We are a small program at the moment, but we are growing. And we do get a lot of attention globally. We do have some relationships with a few universities in the Middle East that our undergraduate program director, Faridun Rahmani, can speak to more than I can. But we do have these linkages and connections around the world. And the goals of our department are pretty straightforward. Our goals are primarily to deal with issues of human rights and equity across the board. And I think that gives students a broad palette to work with while they're students, but also when they finish their degree, because studying human rights and equity studies, we believe, opens up a whole wide array of options for students, from working for and engaging with global institutions. For instance, I myself, for instance, was part of my research focuses on the works of the international community, international law, and also institutions like the International Criminal Court, as well as my research also focusing on the theoretical aspects of human rights. In other words, trying to figure out how and in what context human rights apply, both within international law and beyond. So students, I think, are given that kind of broad context to work with. And our goals are primarily to make sure that students have the requisite knowledge that combines both this global environment that I've been speaking of and emphasizing, and that our faculty, I think, in the classroom also emphasizes, but always in a relationship to the local. So we have this notion of human rights, of course, in the international context, as I mentioned, but we also have ways in which human rights deeply impact workplaces, for instance, government workplaces, private workplaces. Human rights are definitely something that are increasingly being discussed within even corporate boardrooms. And so our students, I think, in terms of job opportunities, have a wide spectrum of possible job opportunities from, as I said, governments, international organizations, non-governmental organizations, all of whom, or many of whom, I should say at least, intersect with the concern of human rights. So those are, at that international level, but then even at the local level with local governments, and also, which we might not think of offhand immediately, the kind of private enterprise environment where, in fact, from our kind of correspondence and contact, we find that there are many private enterprises, private companies that are incorporating human rights perspectives into the workplace. Human resources departments, for instance, are increasingly focusing on human rights. And so we feel ourselves quite capable of dealing with that. I mean, we do have a history in our program of dealing with things like anti-racist practice, Indigenous studies, where for many years we were co-affiliated with Indigenous studies, but we still have, an expertise and a focus on that. And so from some of our faculty, we have ways in which we look at the workplace in terms of human rights. Definitely in this pandemic environment, worker rights, workplace rights are definitely increasingly intersecting with human rights. Issues from safe work environments to making sure that people don't lose their jobs unfairly because of the consequences of the pandemic. So those are kind of interesting offshoots that we're seeing in the last few number of years, given our situation. But we do have a very broad kind of perspective on how we look at human rights. So human rights from the economic perspective, as I mentioned, how workers and worker rights are being implemented within various environments. We have political, focuses on how states and their leaders and politicians implement or don't implement human rights. And we know around the world that we have ongoing cases of genocide, ongoing cases of minority injustice going on in different parts of the world. So we also focus on that. We focus on questions of cultural rights and indigeneity, as I mentioned, which is in the Canadian context very important because we have, for instance, one of the things that, for example, I focused in on my courses, at least partially, is the question of our Charter of Rights and Freedoms and how that relates to a wider discussion of human rights. We also focus on questions of security and privacy. We're increasingly, I think, focusing on those sorts of issues. I think we're getting a new hire in that kind of area on technology, because that's, of course, a major issue in the age of social media, in the age of increasing, web-based information, online-based information, even personal information that we are using increasingly. The question of what rights we have to protect our information, to make sure that our information is not being misused by government or private business. That's something that we are also focused on. And in terms of, our faculty, we have a very diverse faculty. I argue that probably one of the most diverse faculties in terms of a wide representation. We have a good mix of very experienced researchers and teachers and, newer, younger researchers as well who are coming in. And this, I think, creates a very dynamic place. We are definitely a very cooperative faculty. And so I think one of the things that students will find when they come into the program is that we are a small program. But as I said, we are a unique and unusual program in some ways. That smallness, I think, makes us quite capable of engaging with students in more face-to-face interaction. Our students really become known to us, which is something that some students are concerned about, and rightfully so, knowing their professors, knowing their TAs, knowing their faculty members within the program. That, I think, in our program is one of the unique features of what we do. That allows us to, the small kind of number of classes we have in comparison to faculty, I think makes us able to forge these close relationships with students where we can then guide them along. We have a number of high achieving faculty members, including Yvonne Su, who is not here, but has received numerous research grants. We have a tradition of receiving research money for areas of study within human rights and beyond, in areas such as diaspora studies, anti-racist practice and research. So there's, I think, a very interesting, engaging, and inspiring mix of faculty and research going on in our program, which many students, I think, would find useful and inspiring. And in terms of the skills that we try and teach everyone is, to think about human rights in various contexts, so that it's not just for us, it's, not just in the classroom. And one of the ways that we expand our notion of human rights is by having certain work study programs or practicum programs, which we are offering this year. Interestingly, we're beginning with this. So once again, you can see the expansion that we're going through. We are offering a number of our students practicum programs where they can volunteer at various organizations, from municipal government level to various NGOs. For example, the Center for the Center Against Torture in the city of Toronto has offered us a number of student placements. And so we offer those, and those numbers are available now for students in the fourth year, and they will be carried over into our graduate program as well. So we offer, kind of expert knowledge in the area of human rights, which includes, as I said, knowledge of law, knowledge of politics, and those sorts of things, which I think many NGOs, many governments, as I said, and private companies are interested in. And we also offer, increasingly offer practicums or insight kinds of training, volunteer / work study programs where students will spend, as I said, time working for certain organizations where they can learn about the practical uses, the practical implications, the practical ways in which human rights become real concerns in these real life contexts. So in terms of skills training, I think we offer students those kinds of unique approaches and opportunities, wherein then, of course, they can make, and we facilitate them making links, making connections with the areas, many of the, of course, vast areas outside academia. And that allows them to definitely connect with future and potential employers, we hope, but also to gain valuable experience outside the classroom. So we have that as a very interesting kind of approach that we are increasingly focusing on. In terms of human rights as an area of study, it is a growing area of study. So we are in many ways getting in on the ground floor, as it were, in our program. And we think that students will also be getting in at a level of expansion where maybe other programs have been established for a long number of decades, with general areas of study in academia. Human rights and equity studies is a new, burgeoning, growing field. And it is something that definitely, if we were to advise students on how to learn about this area of study, we might say, first off, pick up, any kind of newspaper, of course, virtually pick up a newspaper these days. Pay attention to the news, pay attention to kinds of, interactions between nations where human rights becomes, a major area of concern and discussion. It's throughout the media, it's throughout our popular culture, it's throughout our global political situation, as well as domestic situation. So my first advice to students always is pay attention to the news, look at the ways in which human rights is being discussed in the media, in the news, and you'll get a sense for what's going on. One text, that I use in my class is Thomas Moyne's The Last Utopia. And this is a very kind of interesting examination of the rise of human rights as a concern, both politically and academically. And he traces the rise of human rights from the late 1970s to our own day. And so there's this kind of trajectory of concern with human rights that he talks about that, as I said, also ties into the development of our program. And as I mentioned previously, we are in the process, we have submitted a very detailed proposal for graduate studies, which would be a Master of Arts in Critical Human Rights. which, as I said, we did a lot of consulting around, and looking up of, different programs that might have similarities to such a program. And we found one in Canada, the University of Manitoba, that focuses on an MA in human rights. And in Canada, that would be it. So there would be, New York and its critical human rights program would be only the second one in Canada that deals with human rights specifically. And I believe we would be the only program in North America that deals with what we call critical human rights. And so that, I think, is also an important aspect of what we do, that we don't just kind of try to repeat the global kind of language around human rights, but that we also try and introduce students to the ability to be critical about human rights, to take a critical stance towards human rights, to understand, for example, not only how human rights unfold in global context and local context, but how and in what ways we haven't gone far enough in terms of promoting human rights and placing human rights within our institutions in a very broad way. So I think from that perspective, we are very innovative, very unique. And I think that students who come into our program would both, have this kind of very broad global perspective that they can interact with, but also a very local and warm kind of environment. We have a wonderful staff that is also award-winning. For example, Mavis Griffin in our program has won numerous awards as one of the most helpful and engaging staff person for students. She is very committed to helping students, guiding them through, because as a smaller program, many students might not know the requirements and that sort of thing, and she is always there to help. So we have a very active staff that works with us and that believes in the program. And of course, as I said, a very active and engaged faculty. So I think those are the main points, but I don't know how we should proceed other than that. That's, I think the main points that are important for us as a program.
Thank you, Professor Brienza. That was a fantastic overview of the program, covered a lot of topics there. I'd like to bring in your colleague, Professor Hooper, if I could. And I was hoping we might have a little bit of a discussion, a little bit more in depth on some of the areas of human rights and equity studies. So I know you talked a lot about that this is a new program, that it's in its sort of foundations, but it has been around for a little while. And I was wondering if we could talk a little bit. I always say that, the pyramids never change, but how we contextualize them and how we understand them does. And if we could talk a little bit about how our understanding of human rights has changed, and where the students who are starting today are potentially going to be able to take that study in the future. I don't know who wants to tackle that first. I don't know if you have thoughts on that, Professor Hooper.
Professor Brienza, maybe you can take that one.
Sure. Well, there are a number of research areas that we focus on and that students definitely end up very interested in. One is international law and human rights. And so there we offer students a unique opportunity to, as we're also developing international connections with, for example, studying the International Criminal Court, looking at human rights in various contexts around the world, and looking at how human rights can be implemented, also how difficult it can be to implement human rights. So that, I think, is one area that is global in orientation. Then we have, I think, a number of our students and faculty who are interested in local applications of human rights. So within, for example, or national locations where, for example, the relationship between the government, society, and Indigenous communities. That's one that we are definitely, we get a lot of interest from students, and is also a growing area of research, I think, as we all know, are trying to rethink our relationship to that very important and significant community in Canada. We are also increasingly, at least some of us, including myself, are, I think, focusing more on economic rights and rights within the workplace, which in this COVID environment, workers' rights, I think, are an incredibly important part of the whole picture of human rights and human development and human fulfillment that we are increasingly focused on. We are also focused in various ways on the issues of the LGBTQ plus communities and their diversity. And because that's, it's interesting when we look at refugee issues, which one of the faculty members, unfortunately, who couldn't be here, Yvonne, that's her area of research and focus is refugee issues. And I have had a number of students, for instance, who are members of the LGBTQ plus community, and they have, basically escaped from places in the world where that kind of, lifestyle, that kind of orientation, that kind of identity is very much under attack. And so that's also another area I think that people are increasingly looking at, and that has generally been understudied as well. So those are, I think, some of the, and also one last one would be technology and the increasing, question about technology, about, privacy, about whether or not information can be shared easily with, your personal information with government, security around those sorts of issues, and also how those issues impact, issues of equity in terms of access as well, because, internet access, for example, is something that some of my students, and I'm sure, many other students have struggled with in terms of getting easy access to internet service, especially for those from more marginalized communities. And so those, I think, are some of the main issues that I see emerging.
Sorry, can I jump in on just because as a new faculty, I feel like I'm a new student almost in some ways. I'm new to the department. And one of the things that struck me about equity studies at York is how diverse our faculty are coming from different areas of expertise. So this is an interdisciplinary program. We have criminologists, sociologists, people from political science, women, gender, and sexualities. And then me, I'm a historian. And so when you take courses in our program, you're going to be exposed to a variety of different approaches, disciplinary approaches to studying and understanding these various issues. And I think that's a really important strength. It's been a huge strength for me as a new faculty. My work is already improved because of the colleagues that I'm working beside here in this program. I also think, we should, in addition to it being a brilliant program, our colleagues are approachable. This is such an approachable program. The professors, you can show up to their office hours. You can talk to them. You will get to know them because of the size of our program. And so I think that, when you hear about how brilliant our colleagues are, that shouldn't put you off. You should feel welcome. You should feel like this is an approachable program. Our faculty cover, as Paul mentioned a lot of them, Professor Brienza, mentioned a lot of them, Indigenous reconciliation, health policy, Islam and social justice, international human rights law, refugees and forced migration. We study international development, critical legal studies, youth and justice. And then for me, my specialty is on queer criminalization, 2S LGBTQ criminalization in Canada.
Fantastic. One of the strengths we have here in liberal arts professional studies is our diversity. And I was so happy to hear from both of you, not only the diversity of faculty that we have, but also that diversity of experience from our students. that we have in the program. And that makes for, I think, just wonderful conversations in the classroom. When we think about the classroom, I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about the courses. If there are maybe courses that either of you teach or courses you know of that are particularly popular or interesting, just to give students an idea of what's available for them when they're going to be building their schedules.
Sure. I guess I can start. We have a wide range of courses, even though we are a small program. Many students are interested in certain specializations, but kind of the general courses is where they usually start. So, for example, at the first year level, although it's also a general education course that the faculty and at large also draws upon, but I'm teaching a course on human rights in the global south, so a kind of global context for the inequalities that we see globally. That's proving to be a popular course. I mean, it's fairly new for me, but I'm enjoying it immensely, and I hope the students are. We have, our core courses, such as Intro to Human Rights and Equity Studies, which I believe this year our Professor Libby Visano is teaching. Very popular and engaging professor who, students love. And that, gives them a very broad introduction to human rights, from all those, global contexts that we've been talking about, to charter issues, to workplace issues, to many, many other things. Then I've taught and will be teaching in the winter a course on racism, imperialism, and human rights, which kind of expands on that idea of global inequality. I have taught also in the past on the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which, gives students, I think, a very interesting and important Canadian context to the issue of rights. And there we will talk about things like, Indigenous rights and land issues, to workplace rights, to issues of general inequality in our society, and whether or not, the law, because some of our students might be interested in law. And in fact, we do cooperate in some ways with law programs like Osgood. Does the law provide us with appropriate remedies, or are there limitations to law? Do we need to go beyond law? To, fourth year classes where we focus more on issues like genocide, how we recognize and understand genocide, how we may deal and, overcome the problems of genocide. So I think we have a very broad range of courses there. And they're all, I think, focused on human rights, but they are also introducing students to broader frameworks. Those are, I think, off the top of my head, some of the more popular courses that I've taught, but I'm just, speaking from my perspective, of course.
And
for example, his own take on it.
Well, one of the courses that I'm teaching right now, it's my favorite course that I've ever taught in my career, and it's a third year course called Social Justice Theory and Practice. And the reason I love this course is because it embodies what we're doing in this program. Not only are we teaching you about critical human rights theories, we're also trying to create a passion for social justice advocacy. We are dedicated to training a generation of global leaders who are going to change the world. And so this course, Social Justice Theory and Practice, we learn about the theories around critical human rights, but we also learn about the practical aspects of advocacy, going out into the streets and protest, lobbying governments to change laws, taking governments to the courts. These are just various examples of what we study in that class. And so I wanted to highlight that one. But for first year students coming in, I'm just going to plug my course, Sexuality, Gender, and Society. It's a gen ed course, so you're going to be learning about human rights and equity studies, but we're also going to be introducing you to the fundamental skills that you're going to need to succeed in your undergraduate education. So your writing skills, your critical reading skills, and we're going to introduce you to the basics of research. And on that point, I want to raise just one other class. It's a third-year class called Research Methods in Human Rights and Equity Studies. And I want to highlight that class because what we're going to do in this program is we're going to give you the tools to become the independent critical thinkers. You're not going to need us when you're done with this program. You're going to go out into the world with the ability to critically understand issues related to human rights, and you're going to be able to go out and find high quality scholarly research in order to support the ideas that you come up with. So those are just some of the examples of courses that I would put forward.
That's fantastic. That's a really exciting list, and I hope the students who are watching are enthusiastic about the opportunity to take some of these courses. I think that's all the time that we have for today, but I do want to close out with just one more brief discussion if we could. Students who have watched this video, they've learned about human rights and equity studies, and they're still maybe on the fence about whether this is right for them. And I was wondering if you could talk about what some of their peers, some of the traits their peers have. I know that Professor Hooper, you mentioned passion as being something that you're looking to grow. So I can see that being a trait is really important in this study. But what other traits do you think draw students and even professors to the study of human rights that some of our viewers might associate with?
I think there's that passion for change. You know, they see our students, they open up the newspaper, they see a world that has problems, that has conflict, and they want to be part of that solution. Whatever it is they're going to do in their life and in their career, they want to be part of making this world a better place. And so there's that sort of drive for passion. There's also curiosity. Our students want to learn not about their own understanding of human rights. They want to understand human rights from different perspectives and from global perspectives. So it's sort of that passion and curiosity are two of the things that I see most in the students that I've met so far.
Yeah, I think that's very well said, Professor Hooper. I think, I can't add too much to that other than to say, kind of reframe a little bit of what he said in terms of activism, which is, I think we provide students who come to our program are kind of, I think, practical activists. In other words, they want to learn the tools that will help them change the world and become the bearers of the change that they want to see in the world, but in a way that gives them the tools to do so. That they want to get these tools, whether it be learning about law, whether it be learning about international organizations, whether it be learning about how government works, and how these issues get tabled in various discussions, and how to put these issues on the table. I mentioned our work study program. One of the things that our faculty in discussing this program with many of these organizations emphasized was the ways in which students can become involved in the activism that these organizations are involved in, helping write up requests for funding from government, getting kind of involved in that process, organizing protests as well, peaceful protests always, but ways in which they can become involved in the activism in practical ways, because I think sometimes that might be the missing link where students may want to get involved, but they may not know how. So, our program, our faculty in recent years, at least, especially have, we've increasingly tried to focus on how we give them those skills, and students have responded wonderfully to that. That's, I think in many ways they would tell us that's exactly what they want, and they're definitely showing many of them as they go out and graduate from our program that they are, taking that idea to heart, and that they're really expanding on the idea of a kind of practical activism. And I think that's what our program offers in many ways.
Hope you enjoyed the program chat, everyone.
If you have any questions about our LA&PS programs, be sure to visit our website to learn more.
And make sure to stay in touch with us for a chance to win a $100 gift card at the York Bookstore. The link to our website is in the description box below.
You can also send your questions to us, the LA&PS student recruitment team.
We'd love to hear from you, so send us an email at goyork@yorku.ca.
And we look forward to seeing you all on campus next year.
Bye.
Bye.